Thomas Brennan wasn't a religious man, but when he saw 200 Sioux warriors cresting the hill at dawn, their war paint catching the first light like blood on snow, he figured it was time to make peace with whatever God might be listening. They came in perfect formation, silent, deadly. The kind of silence that precedes either a massacre or a reckoning. But let's go back 24 hours, because the choice Thomas made yesterday, the one that seemed so small, so simple in the moment, was about to determine whether his ranch became his grave or his salvation. And the truth is, he never saw it coming. The Montana sun was merciless that August afternoon. Thomas Brennan worked his fence line alone, as he had for the past 3 years since Margaret died. His ranch sat in a valley where 3 territories met: white settler land, Sioux hunting grounds, and the kind of no-man's land where trouble bred like flies on a carcass. He was 52, weathered as old leather, with hands that knew only work and a heart that had forgotten how to hope. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles south. The Army fort was 30 miles east. Out here, a man lived or died by his own decisions. Thomas heard the crying before he saw her. It came from beyond the creek, a child's voice raw with pain and fear. Every instinct told him to ignore it. In this territory, you minded your business if you wanted to keep breathing. The tribes didn't take kindly to white men interfering, and the settlers didn't take kindly to men who helped Indians. But Margaret's voice whispered in his memory, "The measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when no one would ever know." Thomas set down his hammer and walked toward the sound. He found her in a ravine, maybe 7 years old, trapped beneath a fallen log. Her leg was twisted at an angle that made his stomach turn. She was Sioux. That much was clear from her beaded dress and the turquoise in her braided hair. But what stopped Thomas cold wasn't her injury. It was the symbols painted on her dress. He'd lived on the frontier long enough to recognize the markings of Chief Red Hawk's family. This wasn't just any Sioux child. This was the chief's granddaughter. Thomas knelt beside her. "Easy now. I'm going to help." She flinched, tried to scramble back despite the pain. Her dark eyes were wide with terror, not of the log, but of him. "I know you can't understand me," Thomas said softly, "but I'm not going to hurt you." He worked carefully, using leverage to lift the log just enough to pull her free. Her scream pierced the air. The leg was broken badly. Thomas removed his shirt, tore it into strips, and fashioned a splint. The girl watched him with those bottomless dark eyes, her small chest heaving with each breath. When he finished, he sat back. "Your people will be looking for you." She said something in Lakota, urgent, desperate. Thomas didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. "Don't leave me here." He had 2 choices. He could ride to the fort, report finding an injured Indian child, and let the army handle it. That was the safe choice. The choice that wouldn't make him an enemy of the settlers, or he could take her to his ranch, keep her safe until her people came looking. Thomas looked at the setting sun, then back at the girl. She'd never survived the night out here. Wolves. Cold. Blood loss. "Damn it all to hell," he muttered. He lifted her gently, and she didn't fight. She simply gripped his shoulder with one small hand, her fingers digging in like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to kill her. Thomas carried her back to his ranch. With every step, he felt the weight of the choice he was making. He didn't know her name. Didn't know if helping her would start a war or prevent one. All he knew was that Margaret would have done the same. And maybe, just maybe, that still mattered. If you were Thomas, would you take the child home knowing the consequences? Or would you ride for the fort and let others decide? Drop a comment. I need to know where you stand. Because what Thomas decided next would determine whether mercy was rewarded or punished on this unforgiving frontier. Thomas laid the girl on his bed, the one he'd shared with Margaret, the one he hadn't slept in since she'd died in it 3 winters ago. He'd been sleeping in the chair by the fire ever since, unable to face the emptiness. But tonight he smoothed the quilt over the injured child and felt something stir in his chest. Not quite hope. Not quite healing, just something. He heated water on the stove, made a weak broth from dried beef and wild onions. The girl's eyes followed his every movement, suspicious but no longer terrified. When he offered her the cup, she hesitated. "It's food," Thomas said. Won't hurt you any more than you're already hurt. She took it with both hands, sipped cautiously, then drank deeply. She hadn't eaten in days. That much was obvious from the hollows in her cheeks. Thomas sat in the chair across from the bed. I don't suppose you understand English? She stared at him. Didn't think so. He rubbed his face. Your people are going to come looking. When they do, I need you to tell them I didn't hurt you. Can you do that? The girl's eyes flickered to the rifle mounted above the fireplace, then back to Thomas. Smart kid, he thought. She's calculating whether I'm a threat. That gun hasn't been fired in 3 years, Thomas said quietly. Not since the day I buried my wife. I'm not much for killing anymore. The girl tilted her head slightly, processing his tone if not his words. Thomas stood and moved to the window. The prairie stretched endlessly in the moonlight, beautiful and brutal. Somewhere out there, her family was searching, and when they found the trail leading to his ranch, he'd be a dead man, unless she could tell them the truth. The night wore on. Thomas checked her splint twice, gave her more water, stoked the fire. Around midnight, she finally fell asleep, her small face relaxing for the first time. Thomas sat in his chair and didn't sleep at all. When dawn broke, he heard them. At first, it was just a low rumble, like distant thunder. Then it grew louder, the unmistakable sound of horses. Many horses. Thomas stepped onto the porch. The horizon was dark with riders. Not 10, not 20. 200 warriors at least spread across the ridge like a living wall. War paint, spears, rifles. The full might of Red Hawk's tribe, mobilized and furious. They descended slowly, deliberately, giving Thomas time to see what was coming. Time to understand that running was impossible. Time to feel the weight of his choice. Thomas didn't reach for his rifle. There was no point. He simply stood on his porch and waited. The girl stirred inside. Through the window, he saw her push herself upright. Saw her eyes widen as she recognized the sound. She called out something in Lakota, a single word, high and clear. The riders stopped. One man rode forward alone. He was massive, with shoulders like a bison and a face carved from stone. His headdress marked him as chief. Red Hawk. The chief's eyes locked onto Thomas, and in them was a rage so profound it could burn kingdoms. Thomas raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. Your granddaughter is inside. She's hurt, but she's alive. Red Hawk dismounted. His hand rested on the knife at his belt. Behind Thomas, the door creaked open. The girl hobbled out, leaning on the door frame, her splinted leg dragging. She spoke rapidly in Lakota, pointing at Thomas, then at her leg, then at the ravine beyond the creek. Red Hawk's expression didn't change. He walked forward until he stood face to face with Thomas. The silence stretched like a bowstring. Then Red Hawk reached out and placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder. In threat, in acknowledgement, the chief spoke. His voice like rolling thunder. One of the warriors translated, You saved the daughter of my daughter's daughter. You could have left her. You could have taken her to the fort. Instead, you gave her shelter. Thomas exhaled slowly. Couldn't do anything else. Many would have, the translator continued. Many have. But you... Red Hawk studied Thomas's face. You chose mercy, Thomas nodded. I chose what was right. Red Hawk stepped back and raised his voice to the assembled warriors. He spoke for a full minute, his words ringing across the valley. The translator turned to Thomas. The chief says, from this day forward you are under the protection of the Sioux Nation. Any man who harms you harms us. Your land is sacred ground. Your name will be remembered. Thomas felt his throat tighten. I don't need protection. I just need to know she'll be okay. Red Hawk smiled. A rare, genuine expression. She will live. Because of you. The chief mounted his horse, then paused. But there is something you must know, white man. We were not the only ones searching for her. Thomas frowned. What do you mean? There are men from the fort. They learned a Sioux child was taken from her family. They ride this way now with chains and guns. They will not believe you helped her. They will only see a white man harboring an Indian. Thomas's blood ran cold. When will they arrive? Before the sun reaches its peak. The chief gestured to his warriors. We will stay. When the soldiers come, you will not face them alone. And just like that, Thomas understood. The real test wasn't whether he'd help a child. It was whether he'd stand with her people against his own. The soldiers arrived exactly when Red Hawk predicted. Captain Morrison led them, a hard man with a harder reputation. He'd made his career hunting hostile Indians, and his definition of hostile included anyone who didn't submit to chains and reservations. Morrison reined his horse at the property line, his 20 men fanning out behind him. His eyes narrowed when he saw the Sioux warriors positioned around Thomas's ranch. "Brennan," Morrison called, "step away from the savages and we'll overlook your..." Confusion. Thomas stood his ground, Red Hawk beside him. "There's no confusion, Captain. These people are my guests." Morrison's hand moved to his sidearm. "That girl you're harboring, she belongs on a reservation. We're here to take her into custody." "She belongs with her family," Thomas said evenly. "And they're right here. I have orders, Brennan. Don't make me execute them by force." Thomas felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on him. The Sioux warriors were ready to fight. He could see it in their stance, their hands on their weapons, but he also saw the young girl watching from the doorway. She'd already suffered enough. "Captain," Thomas said carefully, "that child fell into a ravine. I found her, set her broken leg, and kept her safe until her family could come. That's all that happened here. You expect me to believe—" "I expect you to use your eyes," Thomas interrupted. "Look at her leg. Look at my medical supplies. I'm a rancher, not a kidnapper." Red Hawk spoke, and the translator relayed his words. "The white man speaks truth. He saved my blood when he could have let her die. Do you punish mercy in your world, Captain?" Morrison's jaw clenched. "I don't need a lecture from a father." Red Hawk's voice cut like a blade. "From a grandfather who nearly lost the heart of his family? You have children, Captain Morrison. I've seen them in your fort. What would you do if a stranger saved your daughter's life?" The question hung in the air. Morrison shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. Around him, his men exchanged glances. They'd come expecting a fight, not a moral dilemma. Thomas pressed forward. "Captain, you can start a war today. You can kill good people who are protecting a child, or..." He paused. "Or you can ride back to your fort and report that a crisis was resolved peacefully. That a white settler and a Sioux chief found common ground. That maybe, just maybe, there's another way. My orders." "Your orders don't require bloodshed," Thomas said firmly. "They just require you to think like a human being instead of a soldier." The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison stared at Thomas, then at Red Hawk, then at the little girl clutching the doorframe. Finally, he exhaled. "If I ride away, this incident never happened. Understood?" Thomas nodded. "Understood." Morrison turned his horse. "Mount up," he called to his men. "We're done here." As the soldiers retreated, Thomas felt his legs nearly give out. Red Hawk steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. "You have great courage, white man," the chief said through the translator. "Not the courage to fight, but the courage to refuse the fight." Thomas managed a weak smile. "I just didn't want anyone else to die." Red Hawk nodded. "That is the greatest courage of all." The warriors began to depart, but Red Hawk lingered. He placed a beaded necklace around Thomas's neck, a symbol of the Sioux nation. "You wear this, you are protected," Red Hawk said. "Any Sioux warrior will recognize it. You will always be welcome in our camps. I don't need..." "It is not about need. It is about honor." Red Hawk gripped Thomas's forearm. "You honored us. We honor you." The chief mounted his horse, then looked back one final time. "The frontier is changing, Thomas Brennan. Men like you are the bridge between the old way and the new. Walk carefully." And with that, the Sioux rode away, taking the little girl safely home. 3 months later, Thomas Brennan stood on his porch, watching the first snow of winter dust the prairie. His ranch had changed. Twice a week, Sioux families would pass by, leaving gifts, dried meat, beaded crafts, tanned hides. They never asked for anything in return. It was simply their way of saying, "You are family now." And Thomas, who had spent 3 years drowning in loneliness, found himself cooking meals for visitors, sharing stories, learning Lakota words, laughing for the first time since Margaret died. The little girl whose name he learned was Morning Star visited once with her grandmother. Her leg had healed perfectly. She walked up to Thomas and handed him a drawing she'd made, a stick figure man standing between a group of stick figures with feathers and a group with hats. "The bridge," her grandmother explained. "The one who connects 2 worlds." Thomas knelt to Morning Star's level. "You're a strong girl," he said. She smiled and hugged him fiercely, then ran back to her family. That evening, a white settler rode by, a newcomer to the territory looking for land. He saw the Sioux gifts on Thomas's porch and frowned. "You one of them Indian lovers?" the settler asked with contempt. Thomas straightened. "No, I'm just a man who helped a child." "And if that makes me something you don't like, you're welcome to keep riding." The settler spat in the dirt and left. Thomas didn't care, because he understood something now that he hadn't 3 months ago. The world was full of people who would judge him for his choices. But the only judgment that mattered was the one he'd see in the mirror. And when Thomas looked at his reflection now, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. He saw a man Margaret would have been proud of. That day on the frontier, Thomas Brennan made a choice that could have cost him everything. He could have walked away, could have let fear decide, could have chosen the easy path, but he didn't. He chose mercy when mercy was dangerous. He chose justice when justice was unpopular. He chose to see a child, not an enemy. And because of that choice, 200 warriors didn't bring war to his door. They brought honor. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo the loudest. Sometimes the hardest choice is the simplest one, to be human when the world wants you to be hard. Thomas Brennan lived another 20 years on that Montana ranch. He never remarried, but he was never truly alone again, because he'd learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the bridges you build when everyone else is building walls. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of dusty afternoons and the sound of hooves pounding in your heart, hit that subscribe button. Every day, we'll sit together, and I'll tell you another tale from the frontier. And don't forget, the best stories aren't just told. They're shared. So share this with someone who needs to remember that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just doing the right thing when no one would blame you for walking away. Now click the video on your screen for another story from the Wild West. One with a twist you'll never see coming.